evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I'm excited to be here with you again for another episode of the BGC Book Club. So as you know, this is a place where we believe in celebrating stories that are by, for, and about us. And tonight is a really exciting one that I know many of you may have already read, or if not, you're going to be wanting to read it after we have this great conversation this evening. So as you come on in the room, if it's your first time, let us know in the comments. Let us know where you're joining us from, or if you're here every week, you can let us know that as well. We do appreciate all of your support as we celebrate spectacular, talented, brilliant Black women writers. So just to let you know, we have a very special guest this evening who will be talking about her book, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize and an NAACP Image Award nominee. And I know my lighting might be a little off there, but the name of the book is What the Fireflies Knew by Kai Harris. So let me tell you a little bit about her before we bring her into the space. So she is a writer and educator from Detroit, Michigan. And I didn't tell her I actually lived in Detroit for several years, so we'll have to talk about that. But she uses her voice to uplift the Black community through realistic fiction centered on the Black experience. She has also published poetry, personal essays, and peer-reviewed academic articles on Black girlhood and womanhood, the slave narrative genre, motherhood, and Black identity. She currently lives in the Bay Area, where she is an assistant professor of creative writing at Santa Clara University. And without any further delay, let's welcome Detroit's own Kai Harris to BGC Book Club. Welcome.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. I love the Detroit's own.
Yeah, Detroit's own. I had to say that because I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, currently living on the outskirts of Atlanta, but I lived in Detroit for 10 years and my dad lived there. And I actually went to college at Michigan State for my first year. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm very well
versed. You got a little Michigan in you.
Yeah, I got some Michigan in me.
Okay.
So I'm excited to have you here. So first of all, just congratulations on the success of your book in the 2 years since it has been out. So what has that been like for you as a first-time author or published author?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for having me here. I'm so excited. These past 2 years have been incredible. I think when I wrote the book and when the book came out, I had dreams and goals, of course, and things that I hoped would happen. But I always tell people, I think what ended up happening was even outside of what I imagined back then, because the book just keeps going. It's been 2 years and people are still buying the book and hearing about the book and telling other people about it. We've recently begun to kind of pick up more traction with the young adult audience. The book was originally for an adult audience and now has crossed over into a young adult audience. So I'm having the opportunity to speak with students and young readers more often. And it's just been incredible being able to talk to people about the book and discovering that it has been so meaningful to so many people.
Yes, and it was definitely meaningful to me to read, first of all, because, I mentioned the Michigan connection, so I could definitely relate to that part. But just, I'll have you tell us a little bit about the book in a moment for those who may not have read it. But just as I was reading the story and learning about the characters and watching what was happening in the course of this summer season, where a lot of happening, there were so many pieces of it that I could relate to, and so that's what really made an exciting read for me, and I'm sure that is what draws others as well of all ages.
Yeah, hopefully so. So many people tell me that they just find the book so relatable, and that comes from people who represent such a wide range of identities, whether it's age, whether it's race, whether it's anything. So many people have told me, I see myself in this book, or this book reminded me of this one summer when I was, a kid, or oh my gosh, this, made me think of me and my sister and what we were like growing up. So that's one of the things that I think is great about this book, is just how many people are able to feel really connected to it.
Yes. So for those who have not had a chance to read it yet, please tell us a little bit about what The Fireflies Knew is about.
Yeah, so What the Fireflies Knew is a coming of age story. It's about a 10 going on 11-year-old girl named Kenyatta Bernice, who most people call KB. And at the start of the novel, KB is being sent along with her older sister Nia to go and live with her grandfather for a while. And she doesn't know how long, and she doesn't exactly know why. All she does know is that her daddy recently passed away, and her mama brings them to their grandfather's house. They don't really know him very well. They think at first they're going to all be there together, but then mama leaves. And so KB and Nia learn that they're going to be spending this summer with their granddaddy. And the book is really just the story of that summer. It's KB's journey in regards to, she's grieving the loss of her father, and she's dealing with the, subsequent mental health challenges that she's experiencing, as well as her older sister Nia and her mama. They're all grieving differently. They're all experiencing different, different issues and navigating those things. There's a lot of, just family dynamics, whether that be between the siblings. KB's 10 going on 11, her sister is 14, 15. And so KB's like trying to, get and keep her sister's attention, and she wants things to be like they always were. She's also trying to make friends in a new place. So that's a big part of the story. So, it's just a regular coming of age story. And I call it a Black girlhood story. I think it's just the idea for me of taking the traditional coming of age genre and infusing it with Black girlhood. So some of these things that I feel like are really associated with the Black girlhood experience. Also just, regular kid stuff, regular life stuff, regular family stuff. So that's how I would describe the novel, just the story of that summer for KB and everything that she learns and figures out along the way.
Yes, yes. And everyone is learning in this book, which I love. We get to see that, the grandfather, AB, her sister, her mother, so many people are learning and being stretched in a multitude of ways in this short time frame. And one thing, it shows you how life can like turn on its head upside down in a very, very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Getting back to the pandemic, how so many things shifted in just a short amount of time, and people's lives changed in that way. But what was it that made you, of course, before the book came out and became this glorious novel that it is, what was it that drew you to want to tell this type of story?
So probably a couple things. I think the first one is I'm discovering now that I write a lot about grief and loss. And it wasn't even necessarily an intentional decision. I've experienced a good deal of loss in my life. And so I think probably the writing is a bit of my own grieving process. But I wasn't aware of that when I started this book. I wasn't thinking about that aspect of it. What I was thinking about was I was in grad school, and I took my first fiction class because I didn't go to school for, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to college. Right. I was just in college because I was supposed to be there. And, I ended up being an English major simply because I took a lot of English classes because I loved to read, and went on to get my master's in English because I still loved to read, and I still hadn't quite figured out what I wanted to do. And then I took a fiction class during that master's program. And in that class, we had a writing prompt to just try and remember anything, like a moment from your past, and try to put it down on the page as vividly as you can so that someone reading it could almost feel like they were there. Mm-hmm. And so I had thought about summers that I used to spend in Lansing with my grandfather. And it stuck out to me because, I don't know. I just always loved Lansing in the summertime. It was different to me than where I grew up in Detroit or in, the Metro Detroit area at different times. I loved being with my grandfather. So he is very similar to the granddaddy in this book, except me and my granddaddy were, really close. I knew him very well and spent a lot of time with him. So that aspect was different. But so I was just remembering being there, and I used to love bugs. I love bugs so much. it's wild to me now because I don't like bugs at all. So I don't know where the transition happened. But when I was a kid, I was all about bugs. I was just like, roly-polies and caterpillars, and we called them lightning bugs, not fireflies.
Right. Yep.
And so so when I was sitting in that class and I had to think of something, I thought of that, and I wrote a scene that was like me catching lightning bugs at my granddaddy's house in Lansing. And what happened after I wrote that scene was I realized that my writing was very different than anything else I had ever tried to write. Okay. So I had tried to write a little bit before that, and I just didn't feel like I was that good at it, like especially with fiction. So I would just write. I like to write poetry and like plays and other things, but I felt like I'm not really that good at writing fiction. And when I did that exercise, I think what happened is I realized I had never been writing any fiction from my own perspective.
Okay.
Every time I wrote fiction, it was from a character who didn't share my identity, like at all. I had one book I was working on, and the main character was a middle-aged white man. I had another book I was working on, and the character was like a young adult white woman. None of the characters were me. They weren't like me. They didn't share my identity. And so I was always reaching a stopping point. I would never finish these books or these stories because there was a gap. There was always something I didn't know, and I couldn't really get into it. And I didn't know that was what was happening until I wrote the scene from at that point, it was my perspective. And then I was like, and everyone in my class was like, oh, I love this character. Yeah. Like, I love her voice. I love this. And I was like, oh, it's my voice. I didn't know. And so I decided to turn it into a novel. And I immediately, changed it from my own story and created a fictional character, KB, someone who shares my identity and has lots in common with me, but is not me, but is, similar enough to me that I am able to write from her perspective really authentically. So I think that was the second part of the motivation, was just like wanting to write Black girlhood, wanting to write from that identity and experience.
And that makes a lot of sense, because that's how you exist in the world. So there is going to be an understanding. I mean, and not that you can't write from a different perspective, but I think there's a level of authenticity that comes through when you are writing from a voice that looks like the characters that you are creating and things like that, which I oftentimes find it interesting, because one of the books that your book has been compared to is, as I have it written here, I have it written down, forgive me, it's one of the other books that is like a coming of age story that was written by a white woman, and how it's just, but she had a lot of Black characters in the book. And so it's like, yes, you can think that but there's something about not having that experience. So I love the fact that you did indeed take it and put it from, your point of view.
Yeah. I write characters that don't have my identity, but I think my main character is really helpful for my main character to share parts of my identity. Because, there's something about when I'm working on a project, I do a lot of work to get to know my characters, and I want to embody them in certain ways. And I try to take up some of their habits, and I, answer questions from their perspective. And it's just a lot easier for me to get into the mind of a character that shares my identity in certain ways. But also, I've been stretching myself lately and writing, new perspectives and trying different things. So it can be done, but it's a different type of work. And I think for me as a debut author, it makes sense that when everything finally clicked for me, it was when I started writing from my own perspective.
And one of the things, and we see this in the book, because KB loves to read, like I can guess that you love to read coming up, as I did. And we kind of see even her make a shift. At first she's reading stories that are good stories, and they resonate with her, but she enjoys them. But as time goes on, she does start to engage or interact with more characters that are, African American characters. So was that a part of your journey as well?
I didn't really read a lot of Black books growing up. I rarely had access to them. I think one of the first Black books I read was when I was in high school in an English class, and we read A Lesson Before Dying. by Ernest Gaines. And that reading that book always sticks out in my mind. One, it's the first book that ever made me cry. Two, it was really awkward that I was crying because I was in a class, and I was in a class with all white students. I was the only Black student in that class, I'm pretty sure, when we read that book. And it was interesting to me because I remember a lot of my classmates not liking the book. Like they didn't really like it. I don't know if it just like didn't resonate, or I'm not really sure what the holdup was. But when I was reading the book, it was really meaningful to me because I was having multiple experiences. The book itself and what it was about was really deep and emotional. But also I was reading Black characters, and I was reading Black characters in a new way. So I had read books with Black characters prior to that, but it was usually books about enslaved people, or it was books about, I don't know, just like, violence or prison, and A Lesson Before Dying does have a prison storyline, but there are also other characters in that book who, are in different spaces in that community, and they have different power, and they're trying to, help their community member. So anyways, I just remember it being like a really big moment for me to read that book, and then also to see my classmates' reactions to reading that book and how different it was. So yeah, when I was a young kid, though, I just loved to read anything. It didn't actually occur to me to think about who the people were in the books that I was reading, because I think in my imagination, I can make anyone like me. So I would read a character, and, that main character, I'm like, this is me, right? I loved Anne of Green Gables growing up, and that's the same book that I gave KB to love as well. And when I was reading that book, I remember thinking to myself, like, I am just like Anne. Like, we are one and the same. And really nothing about my life at all. Nothing about me is like this character. But I felt like I just got her because in scenes where she was misunderstood, or in scenes where she felt like she was being too much, or she was too talkative, or asking too many questions, or she didn't quite fit in, or she didn't know how to make friends. All of those were things that I had experienced and could relate to. So, I think that's one of the things that is really beautiful about I think the publishing industry. We're seeing more Black books start to come into spaces where they weren't before. Right. And, I think the understanding used to be, oh, well, these Black stories are only going to be read by Black people, right? Which is ridiculous, because I, was always able to read stories by people of so many different identities. And it never occurred to me that I couldn't relate to them simply because they were not Black, Yeah. For me, it was just a given. Like, I'm gonna pick up a book and I'll be able to resonate. I have empathy. I have, all of these tools at my disposal. So that's what my journey was like. And I gave KB a bit of a similar journey, in that she's just kind of reading books and finding ways to connect. And then I think moving in with Granddaddy, seeing some of the books on his bookshelf, later, receiving other books, I think then she's able to start to have that process as well. It's not going to make her stop reading the other books. Absolutely. It's not that anything's wrong with the other books, but also being able to have the powerful experience of reading books with characters that look like you is something that's really important as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. For me, it was actually at Michigan State college, and it was The Color Purple in a women's book.
Yep.
It was like the first one for me, because kind of growing up, I just read whatever, because a lot of things weren't necessarily available. We didn't have books like yours to read as I was growing up. So, that's just good. But I want to get into some of what KB is going through, because of course, as you've already mentioned, she's in this season of grief, and now she and her sister are taken to live with their grandfather, or they think they're just going for a visit initially, and with their mom kind of on the heels of the father passing. But then all these other things start to happen. First of all, mom decides, she's just like, okay, kids, like, you're here for the summer, like a lot of times happens in our families where the kids will go away for the summer. So she's dealing with loss in a couple of ways. First of all, losing her dad, being outside of her familiar environment, but then also having her mom leave her with someone that she didn't really know. So that's a lot. That's a lot for a person to, be dealing with all at one time.
Sorry, I'm fighting with my dog right now.
Oh, okay.
He is under my seat and I'm trying to
Almost
get him
on
out.
camera.
Yes, I'm listening.
But yeah, it's just that she's dealing with all of that at the same time, and
Right.
how we know that oftentimes when someone does pass away, it triggers a whole lot of other things within the family. There's a level of instability that
Yeah.
happened, and we definitely see that happening with KB, and
Yeah.
also with her sister Nia.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is one of the big things that was important for me with the novel, is to think about what this looks like for all of these different characters, because, it's just so different for all of them. And I think that's something that happens, that I honestly don't think we talk enough about, is just like what this process looks like, and giving each other space. I remember when I was a young person and I was experiencing loss, one thing that was striking to me was how different we all handled it. Mm-hmm. And, some people wanted to never talk about it. Some people wanted to talk about it all the time. Some people cried, some people did not. Some people were offended by other people crying. There were all these different reactions. And, as a young person trying to understand it all, it was difficult for me to know, like, how am I supposed to grieve? What am I supposed to do? Which one of these examples should I follow? And I wanted to write KB as a character who, instead of trying to take someone else's example to follow, at some point, she'll start to think like, what's my experience, and what does that look like for me? And not without giving anything away, I'll just say that the power in her character is that she's the youngest person in this family, in this book, but she ends up being someone who's really pivotal to everyone else's grieving and healing process. And I think that's really important because oftentimes I don't know that we pay a lot of attention to the experience of young folks when we're like in traumatic situations, or in, I think a lot of times with young folks, like the idea is get them out of the room, shield them from it, protect them, maybe tell them like these little things. But, kids are real wise and have some really important things to say. And, things that shouldn't be brushed aside because, she's young. I think KB has a really interesting perspective on everything that's happening within her family, and everyone could learn from her, so, but also everyone is having their own experience. And I wanted to give space for that as well, to show that, I think that the mom's journey is one that's really important, although she's, not on the page as much as other characters. But she's just another example of someone who is struggling with something and makes a choice, based on that. And all of the characters are very similar. They're all, struggling. They need to make choices that could get them on this journey towards healing that they, ultimately want or need to be on.
Mm-hmm. That is so true, because even the grandfather, everyone, touches everyone's life. But just thinking of her specifically to be like 10 years old, almost 11, that she's turning 11 during the summer. So you're dealing with puberty. We see her deal with some things of, does she like the boys? Does she not like the boys? Right. Trying to make friends. Having, as you've already mentioned, this big sister that she's kind of always looked up to. And that sister is now, she's getting older. She's not necessarily interested in childish games or what are childish games anymore. So it's a lot for one person, to deal with at that age. And, we do see her like really lean into everyone and ask a lot of questions. And I like that she asks and she doesn't just always accept things at face value.
Yes. Yeah. And the flip side of that, it was really important to give her at least one person who would answer her questions. Mm-hmm. And writing the relationship between her and her granddaddy was one of my favorite parts of writing this book. And a part of it was because my granddaddy passed away when I was probably 16-ish, so somewhere in there. And I realized after writing this that probably the last time I would have spent a summer with him in Lansing, I would have probably been about KB's age, because he got sick and he came and actually moved to Detroit and was living with us for a bit and different things. So I realized that, I think I was writing something that was allowing me to grieve and to process in ways that I had it when I was a young person who experienced loss. So that was one of the reasons why it was really meaningful to me. And the second was I just really started loving their scenes together. And I wanted it to be dynamic. So it's not always one thing or the other thing, but their relationship is really rich. And I think that says something about KB. It says something about, generational relationships. It says something about the Black family dynamic. It says, there's a lot to the relationship between the two of them. But I did know that ultimately this kid has a lot of questions. Who's going to answer some of her questions? And, granddaddy might not have wanted to be that person up front, but he does become that person for her, and what unfolds between them because of it, I think is really beautiful.
Yes, it is, because, to think that, and this isn't giving anything away, for her to not even want to be there at first,
yeah.
And watching that relationship grow, because as you mentioned, they didn't really know each other at first. So they're getting to know each other, and, there have been issues between the grandfather and his daughter, who is her mother, just navigating all of those different things at the same time. And, from the adult or from the grandfather's perspective, and even, us as adults thinking, okay, what things should we talk to our children about, or the children in our lives? How much should they know? What things should we shield them from? So we see a lot of that, where there's secrets of things that may have happened in the past, where they're wanting to hold it close to the vest, but then realizing it's not helping anybody by doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's such a big topic. And, I've spoken about, what we choose to tell to young people and what we don't. And, it's definitely a delicate balance, and I'm a mom, so I'm navigating it myself, with my children. But I think, the one thing that keeps coming up for me is, if they're in it, then let them be in it, right? I think when I was growing up, there were things that I was present for, but I wasn't able to ask a lot of questions about or get a lot of information about. And that was difficult for me. And I understand that people wanted to protect me and to shield me from certain things. But I also just felt like there was so much that I didn't know, which makes it difficult when you're trying to process, when you're trying to heal, when you're trying to move forward, but you don't quite know what's going on, So the kids are watching all the time. They're paying attention, they're listening, they're ear hustling, whatever. And so as much as we can talk to them, and, maybe we have to put it in terms that they will be able to understand and process at the age they are at. But there's always something, I think, that we can say, that conversations that we can have that are appropriate, by age.
And yes, that is so true. Of course, there are things that KB finds out because she's ear hustling and things like that, or talking to daddy in ways that maybe Nia is not, because Nia is a teenager and she's ready to, be out and do the things that teenagers like to do, especially in the summertime, away from her parents. She's grieving as well, but dealing with her own things. And it was interesting in reading the story to watch how KB is really feeling some kind of way, because maybe when her and her sister were closer when they were in Detroit and prior to their dad passing, now they're often kind of free, and Nia oftentimes is kind of leaving her to her own devices. But she's still watching her. And that's the thing to think of too, big sister, little sister. Little sisters are watching, and many times wanting to emulate things that they see their big sisters doing. Right.
Which can be a troublesome thing for KB, trying to copy. But I did want to capture that dynamic. I have a big sister. She's my relationship with my sister is not like Nia and KB, mostly because me and my sister are closer in age, so we're a little less than 2 years apart. And we were just always really close. I feel very privileged when I say that, because I know that's not the case for a lot, a lot of folks. And like me and my sister still talk almost every single day. We're very close. We always have been. But I could remember what it felt like for me as my sister was growing up and experiencing things faster than I was. And I was always just trying to be up under her, always just trying to do the same things she did. And, lots of curiosity, but also I really respected her. I looked up to her. So, I wanted to do what she was doing and follow her lead. And so I wanted KB to have that experience as well, but it's a bit different for her because of where they both are. Right. So, when we talk about the mental health aspect, I would say that the two sisters are experiencing different, they're kind of experiencing things in a different way. Nia is probably, I would say she's becoming more withdrawn. I would say that's a big part of her reaction. And yeah, part of it is being a teenager and wanting to go out and hang out with her friends and, kind of just keep herself distant from, but she's also withdrawing. And a big part of how she's doing that is withdrawing from her sister. And, I mentioned before, the ways that we grieve can be different. And, for these sisters, they're grieving in different ways. And the way that KB wants to grieve isn't ideal for Nia, who wants to grieve a completely opposite way. So withdraw, and so they're both experiencing, these kind of different reactions, and it's impacting their relationship. And what's special about KB is just she's the kind of person that's like, I'm going to interrogate this. Right. I'm not going to just let this happen. I'm going to figure out how to fix us. I'm going to figure out how to fix this situation. And that's a big part of what she's doing over the course of the novel is trying to fix everything. She determines like, oh, here's a problem. Here's something going on with the family dynamic or with my granddaddy and my mama or, me and Nia, and she's going to fix it all. That's what she thinks she's about to do.
Absolutely. But the other thing, as you were saying that, and just, recalling back to reading, is that it also shows how two children who grow up in the same household can have different relationships with the parents.
Yes.
Because KB looks at her father, in one way, wherein Nia has had some different experiences, which we're not going to talk about. You have to read it.
Yes, I'm not going to talk about.
Yeah, they have had different experiences. So that's a thing too, because, one person might think, this person was, the bee's knees, so to speak. And, all these people, they just really love this person and adored and maybe put the person on some sort of pedestal, but maybe another child may not see it that way because they have different experiences.
Right. That's so interesting because I've talked to my sister about, similar topics. And now that we're adults, we can, sit around and be like, oh, yeah, you remember when this happened? And so we'll just be talking about things. And then she'll describe something from her perspective. And I'll realize that it's like different in some important way from how I would have described it. And I'm like, oh, really? That's what you got from that? Like, okay, all right. And a lot of it, when we were kids, we weren't really talking about that. We weren't really stopping and saying to each other, let's debrief on what just happened. Let's unpack.
You don't know that.
We were just in life, we were just going through it. And so I think I became an adult person, and I assumed me and my sister saw everything the same way. I just thought that. I just figured we saw things the same way. And so growing up and learning that we didn't, we see a lot of things the same way, but there are some things that we almost fundamentally different on, which is great. It's great that we, can now talk about it. And it also helps me, again, as a mother, to think about, I have 3 daughters and they are nothing alike. They are all very different from each other. They have things in common, but no two of them are like, oh yeah, they're just alike, So I'm thinking about that all the time. If something happens and I, respond in a certain way, I might think to myself, the way that I responded was probably helpful to this kid, but this kid maybe needed something else. And this kid maybe needed another thing. And so it's a lot to think about all the time. So, I'm sure a lot of times I'm missing some pieces and can't give everybody everything, but it is really helpful to think about it that way. And to think like, we all have these very different experiences, from the same experiences. we're going to react different ways to, the same stimulus in a lot of occasions. So that was something I wanted to explore with KB and Nia. And also just, I love writing about siblings, because it's another thing that can be very universal. Many people have, some understanding of a sibling experience, even if that's to have been an only child or to not have siblings. We kind of have a sense of it or an understanding of it. And so it's interesting to try to write about different dynamics. I'm writing a new book right now, and my main character is, grew up in foster care and didn't have siblings. And there's still an ability for me to be able to talk about what that feels like. So, I think it's also just a topic that's really interesting to me.
Oh, it definitely is. Well, you're already going to be invited to come back and talk about that. I spent some time as a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate for children in foster care. So that's something always interesting, just to see the dynamics. And
I might have to talk to you about that.
I got you. I got you. Yes, because there's definitely some things with that, and aging out and all these different things that happen with children that are in the foster care system.
Yeah.
But I do, speaking of children, this book not only talks about grief and the family dynamics and the coming of age and all of that, we do see some race play out in the story as well, with neighbors that live nearby, and how this is the first time, of course, KB being in Detroit, and I'm going to assume she probably was, in Detroit. She may not have really been interacting with a lot of children of other races, but then going to Lansing, and it's a different experience. And one thing I know that that other people might not know, that Lansing and certain parts of Michigan, put it this way, there's Detroit, and then there's the rest of Michigan.
Absolutely. Right.
Different experience. There are, some of the white supremacist groups and all sorts of things that were in other parts of Michigan. So, of course, this is a new experience for her. So what was it that made you want to include that element in the story as a part of KB's growth?
Yeah. So all of what you said is hitting the nail on the head. When I was writing this book and I was thinking to myself, I'm writing a story about Black girlhood, there were certain things that I felt like I needed to include for it to be authentic, I guess, to the experience. And when I thought about those summers in Lansing, it's exactly what you just said. Like when I was in Detroit, Detroit's Black. There would be many days that I could be walking around Detroit and I would only see Black people all day, so that's one kind of experience. And then after about fourth grade, I started going to I would say predominantly white schools, but some of them were like all white schools. Like there were like 5, 6 of us that were Black. And so I had a home life that was like all Black. And then I had a school life that was like all white. And that was always very interesting to me, the dynamics there. So I wanted KB's experience to be a little bit different. Like, what if she didn't go to predominantly white schools? What if her main communities were all majority Black, and then she goes to Lansing? What would that have felt like to her? And so then I started, thinking about it. And you're right. There are lots of areas in Michigan, unfortunately, that are not welcoming to Black folks. Growing up, my mom and my sister and I used to like to go on little road trips and go find like cool little places to visit. And on a number of occasions, we stumbled into little Michigan towns that were super cute on the brochure, but were not cute for us, right. And that's just an unfortunate reality that we, know as Black folks. And so I wanted her to have that experience because it's an experience that I think is important to show. And I also wanted to add a complication with her journey to try and make friends in this new place. Because she does start making friends with these kids, and she doesn't really, know what's going on.
Right.
I wouldn't call KB naive per se. I think she wants to believe the best in everybody. So I don't, she's not dumb at all. She's just a very hopeful and optimistic person. And so when she meets these kids, she's like, okay, maybe these are going to be my friends. And there are some sweet moments of friendship in their interactions, and there are some tough moments in their interactions. And again, I felt like writing both of those things was really important in trying to get this experience down, because it's a part of it. And I've made friends when I was growing up with people who have said to me, "Oh, my whole family's racist." And these are my friends. We are hanging out at school, and you always have to sit with that and think about it and wonder what it means. Wow, my friend told me that her granny said this really wild thing about Black people at Thanksgiving dinner last week, and now this is my friend. I'm still hanging out with this person. Like, how does that make me feel? And so it's an interesting experience that a lot of us are familiar with, unfortunately. And so I just wanted to get a bit of that down in the book.
And the thing is definitely that it's something that's taught, that children aren't born that way. They're not born to not love or like or be willing to befriend other people. They have to be taught that, because but there, that I'll just say this without giving it away. That very first scene when we were drawing together, I was like, "Oh Lord." But you know it because you wrote it, and anybody who's read it,
There was a moment.
Like, what? So yes, it's just something to realize, and I mean that is something just to see how that plays out as well. So we haven't really talked a lot about the mom, but as I mentioned before we came on, we know that this is Mental Health Awareness Month. And mental health is a part of the story. It's something that you're very passionate about, including it and talking about it and the realities of it. And once again, no spoilers, but the mom is going through a situation that they have to navigate, and looking at all of the things that have gone on, being married, the things that were happening with her husband, which we haven't talked about. You have to read it. The fact that she's lost his husband, now she's a single parent trying to navigate and do all of these things. You can understand why that might be a challenge for anyone going through all of those things at once. But I like the fact that you do address that mom needed a little break. There were some things that mom needed to do. So that's a very important part of the story, even though it might not be the forefront of the story. It is a very important part of it. So what was it that made you want to make sure that you tapped into that and included in Where the Fireflies?
In the first draft, I hadn't actually gone super in depth into the mom's character and where she was at and why she was where she was at or any of that. And at that time, the reason why I hadn't really gone into it was because my story's told from the first person perspective of KB. And so I just said to myself, well, KB doesn't know where she's at, so the reader doesn't know where she's at. And I left it at that. And my agent, my editor, challenged me to think about it a bit deeper, because what I came to realize is that I also didn't know where she was at, right? When I was first writing it, I hadn't really thought it through. I just knew that I wanted them to be there without her. And so then I had to really interrogate that. And I came up with lots of different things. And that's where most of, her character came about for me, was thinking about it then on the back end. And then giving KB the opportunity to do some ear hustling, find out kind of some things about what's going on. But the reason why I felt like this was important was because I use a lot of flashbacks in the story. And so I show what life was like for KB and her family at home. And I write enough that you can come to understand that this mom was probably struggling. She was in a relationship with an addict, and dealing with all that came with, and, living in the home with this person and raising kids with this person. And so, I think it just felt important for me to give her some grace, for me to, because I think the way that the story was originally written, some people said to me, well, what a bad mom that she would leave her kids after they just lost their dad, like how selfish, how, and this was because in that version, I didn't have anything else. I was, I had early readers and, and she was coming across as really selfish. In my mind, I knew it wasn't a selfish act, but I hadn't written that into the story nor thought about exactly what it looked like for her. So I wanted to think about that. And, just having this understanding as a mom, as someone who I, deal with my own mental health challenges as a mom. And one of the things that I've come to learn is that it's really important for me to take what I need, and to not always think in terms of, but I have to give to my children first. Because if I'm always trying to give to my children first, I sometimes won't have anything to give to them because I don't have it. And so I had to recognize that, like, how do I have it? How do I give myself what I need to then be able to be a really good mom when I'm, with my children? So I wanted to think about that for her. And the reality for her as a character is this is a mind-blowing, devastating turn of events for this woman who's just lost her husband, the father of her children, her home, because, and this isn't, I guess, a spoiler, because this is, it's within the first 5 pages, we learned that that's what's going on with them. So she's lost all of this, and she has these 2 girls who need her, but she doesn't have anything right then to give to them. And so she takes them to her dad. And, later, if you read the novel, or if you've read the novel, you'll understand why that was a big decision for her to make, given her own circumstances. But it's a choice that she makes for herself. And I want that to be viewed as powerful instead of selfish.
It definitely is. And, in making that choice, we've already touched on it a little bit, and all the other little pieces and parts that are happening throughout the story, it actually is something that brings about a sense of healing for the entire family in making, that decision. So, it all definitely comes together. But, I just think about the fact that a lot of times maybe people can't do that. They don't have, that village, so to speak.
Yes.
That they can turn to. So, I mean, there's that aspect as well, that, in spite of what the relationship may have been with her father, she knew that that was still a safe place that she could take her children. Because I had to admit, as I was reading, and certain things, it was like, well, something happened. I'm like, what happened? I hope it's not what I think it was. And it wasn't. But just like, because that would have been a whole nother thing. If it was,
I know what you're talking about.
Right. But it's just like, because that is something. If your relationship is kind of it's iffy, but you still know that that's a safe place. So that spoke volumes for what she thought of her father as well. That she knew that she could take her children there and that they would be okay.
Well, that's one thing I borrowed too from my own life story, I guess, or, my mother and her father. She talked to me about how the 2 of them had a strained relationship. And at the time when she told me that they had a strained relationship, it threw me off. I had no idea. I thought they were probably really close because we were really close with our granddaddy, my sister and I, and he spoiled us so much. I mean, he just treated us beautifully. The relationship was just amazing. He was so sweet and so loving, caring. And, it was really interesting because, my mom talks about it now as like, she thinks that was like his way of making amends with her is through her children. But she also talks about how difficult that was for her to see, her father being able to show that love so easily, that she had been wanting as a young person herself, or even as she grew into adulthood and before he, passed away. So that was something that was really interesting to me. Those dynamics are just so, I could write so many books about this topic of just thinking about like family dynamics and the way that those things play out. Because, for me, I saw it as, oh, he was probably such a great father, because I was seeing him as a grandfather to me and thinking he was probably such a great father. And meanwhile, my mother had this, this wound from the relationship that they shared. But then there was some healing to that wound when she was able to see the relationship that he had with her children, which is something that I experienced with my own father. So, you know, it's like it goes on and on and on. There are all of these like considerations, and you know, it's complicated, it's tangled, but there's something beautiful about it, and about the ways that we have these, I don't know, maybe like second chances. I think Granddaddy's moment with KB and Nia is a new chance, a new start for him as well. So that was another aspect of it that, you know, I wanted to try and get across.
Yes, and you do it quite so well. I devoured the story, and you know, I could tell you now I don't really have a bunch of notes because I could just talk about it. I'm enjoying it. So yes, I can appreciate that, and just seeing that family. And like you just said, sometimes, you know, I think with a parent, you know, the parent of the child, the relationship can sometimes be strained because parents have a certain expectations, and then if the child doesn't live up to their expectations or doesn't do it in the way that they thought that they should have done it, there's that kids, it's like, you know, I love you, but I'm not really responsible for you.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. So that is something, seeing that dynamic. But one of the things I know that you just love really diving into, just talking about Black girlhood and womanhood in general. And of course, this is just one of many things that you have written, your first novel with more to come. But, you know, what is it? Is it because you're a mother of girls, or is it something that's always kind of been innate within you to really want to be able to celebrate Black girlhood and womanhood?
That's a great question. Let me think. You know, it's one thing I'll say is it wasn't very intentional. As like, you know, I didn't set off and say, this is what I am going to write about forever. These are the kinds of stories I will write. The first story came about very organically, like I mentioned, from the exercise in class. And then it just really made sense that it was going to be this story of Black girlhood. The second book that I wrote, which is going to be coming out in 2026, it's called Any Other Place. It's another coming of age story, but the main character is a bit older. She's 15, so high schooler. And it's similar in the sense that the perspective is a Black girl. But that book was actually born from experiences that I had as a high schooler, and then kind of considering some of the possible what ifs of my own experiences if they had happened in a different way at a different time. So the book is set at the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and kind of just considers this group of kids at this predominantly white school, and their responses to things that are going on at their school and in the world at large. And so in that sense, it's a Black girlhood story. It's a bit different because that story has much more to do with race than this first book.
Right.
And so it's, you know, a bit of a different spin. The third book that I'm working on, I wouldn't necessarily call it a Black girlhood story, but my main character is a Black girl. She's a college student. So I think maybe it's, you know, perspective, like that just seems to be, these are the characters that I'm interested in exploring at this point in my writing journey. You know, I keep writing stories from the perspective of young Black girls and Black women. And, you know, they're kind of getting older, it seems, as I go. And so maybe that means something. Maybe, you know, that will keep happening, or maybe I'll go backwards at some point. I'm not really sure. But, you know, I think, you know, I'm very interested in writing from the Black experience, because like we talked about earlier, I think it's just really important to have these books on shelves and available to people. You know, when I go and talk to young people and they tell me the impact of reading my book on, you know, on them as young Black girls, I know that, you know, I'm doing something that's really important. But I think what I really just do is just tell stories that I'm burning to tell for some reason. You know, right now that's what it's been, is just something like I'll just be itching to tell a story, and that's the one that I'll tell. But I did have a lot of influence during my PhD. One of my areas of study for my PhD was coming of age stories of Black girls. Okay. And so I think that probably did have a lot to do with, me, because I was reading these books and I just was falling in love with character after character, and also realizing how similar things that I was writing was to these stories, even if I hadn't read them yet. I was like noticing all of these similarities between characters I was writing, the types of themes that come up in my books. And I was like, oh my gosh, those of us who are writing Black girlhood, we're writing very similar things, even if we don't mean to. When I wrote my second book, I wrote the whole thing, and then I read The Hate You Give afterwards.
Wow.
And I was like, this is the same book. But I hadn't read it. I hadn't seen the movie. I had no exposure to it. I told you I wrote that book based off of an experience that I had. And so, and they're actually very different, and so it's going to be fine because they're exploring completely different things, but there were a lot of similarities because that main character was very similar to my main character, who was very similar to me. Right? She was a Black girl growing up in Detroit, going to school at a predominantly white school, feeling like she didn't really fit in either space, that kind of being called an Oreo, being called like all these different things. And so I was writing that character. Angie Thomas was writing that character because these are experiences that we have, in common. So I don't know. I think that's probably what it is. Right now, I'm just writing stories that I'm itching to tell. And I love writing from the perspective of Black girls and Black women because I think we're really dope. And I think writing from our voices creates really, really powerful and beautiful stories.
So are your daughters old enough to read your work?
Yeah, well, one is, I have a teenager. She's going to be 16 this week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Hey, mama.
Yeah. So she's old enough to read it. She didn't read it though.
Oh, okay.
She's gonna leave it at that. She started reading it. I don't think it's her kind of book, but I think she's gonna probably like my second book more than this first book. She's giving me a look over here.
Well, happy birthday, sweetheart.
Her headphones on, but I think she heard me start talking about her. Okay.
Yes. So tell her. Marcy said happy birthday.
Yes, happy early birthday. The other two are younger, so they haven't read it yet, but they want to. My 11-year-old keeps putting in a pitch like, can I read it? Can I read it? And she's about to start middle school. I've told other people who have asked me if it was appropriate for a middle school reader, I would say if you're going to read it with them, I think it can be okay. You just want to be on hand to discuss, some of the harder topics that will come up together. So.
I just find that interesting, but she's giving you the side eye, like, don't talk about me. Typical teenager.
Exactly. But she knows she ain't read my book, but she don't want me to tell nobody.
Like, yeah, ma, I read it.
Exactly.
Yes, well, Kai, this has been so wonderful to have this conversation with you because, as I said, I've known about the book for quite a while, and then, just recently had an opportunity to connect with, we were able to make the right connection so that I could bring you to the space to be able to talk about it and I don't want anyone that is a full grown at a big age like myself to think that, this book isn't for you, because it is. There are just always things to learn just about individuals and dynamics and all of that. And, we need to listen to the voices of younger people. There are things that we can see of ourselves by listening to them and, maybe thinking about and, coming to some conclusions or about, what we learned from them, and also just learning how to have better conversations with the 16-year-olds who don't read our books.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I think this has been a wonderful time. I enjoyed you so much. So I know that you said that the book, a couple of years out is still getting a lot of attention. Are there any spaces or places that you'll be in the coming days or weeks that people can find you to, maybe come see you or whatever the case may be?
I don't have anything coming up soon, but for people who have book clubs, I do have a form on my website. If you're doing a book club, you can fill out the form and I will pop into your book club on Zoom and hopefully maybe send you some goodies afterwards. It depends on how many goodies I have on hand at the moment, but I love to go and talk at book clubs. One of my favorite things to do. So fill out that form on my website. It's just authorkaiharris.com. And that's a good way to be able to meet with me and talk to me about the book.
Yes, yes. Oh, and we didn't mention this. I have to mention this. On there is like a book club, like a 4-pager that you can use, and you have a playlist on there because we did not talk about it, but the book actually takes place in the 90s, in summer of 95. So there's a good, I should say, playlist that you can listen to and, you know, get the vibe of that time period. So I'm going to assume maybe you were like young in that age, in that 90s.
You're assuming right. Yeah, I set the book the way that I did because that was when I would have been that age. So yeah, so KB is 10 in 95 and I was 10 in 95. So yeah, so the playlist, I love the playlist. I now I'm in the habit of making playlists for every book that I write, and I do it as I'm writing the book. But this playlist actually I made after the fact. And mostly my husband made it, or, you know, he helped me make it. I think he might be on this call, so let me go ahead and give him the credit. But he helped me curate the playlist based off of songs that were mentioned in the book, artists mentioned in the book, songs that I feel like capture the themes of the story. So I think it works really well to listen to as you're reading, or, you know, maybe at your book club discussion about the book, you can have it playing in the background. I've had people do that. I've also had people at their book clubs make some of the foods mentioned in the book, which is really cool. So lots of really fun ways, I think, for book clubs to interact with this book.
And last but not least, we talked about lightning bugs or fireflies. What the Fireflies Knew, the actual title of the book.
Yeah.
So what was it that helped you to land on that, or working in tandem with your publisher to land on that actual title?
You know what? This is the title that I already had this title when I sold the book. So it came from that first scene that I wrote of this book when it was still a story in a grad school class. And it wasn't called this then. Back then, I think it was called The Mayonnaise Jar. The story was called The Mayonnaise Jar because it had 2 scenes, the firefly scene and then the caterpillar scene when Granddaddy gives her a mayonnaise jar to collect caterpillars. So that was The Mayonnaise Jar. When I turned it into a book, the working title for a while was Fireflies and Funerals, which was not the same vibe. No. But I knew that I wanted it to center on fireflies, because to me that had started to feel like the central image of the book, especially because I knew that was the first scene I had ever written for this book. So it was special to me. Yes. And so
you can kind of see him a little bit, the yellow.
Yep. And so I wanted to pick a title that would reflect that image. And I wanted to play on something else that I feel like is central to the novel, which is this theme of knowledge and truth and secrets and things like that. And so I came up with just a play on words with What the Fireflies Knew, just kind of playing on that knowledge theme. And I took it to Twitter and I did a poll, and I had like 4 different titles, and that was one of them. And it won, but it like barely won. So then I did another poll with 4 different titles, but I still had What the Fireflies Knew, like in a different position to try to throw people off. And it won, but it still barely won. Wow. So I was like, okay, whatever. I guess this is the title. I wasn't convinced about it. But then as soon as I saw it all together, I was like, this is the title.
And what I'm thinking, light in the darkness. So yeah.
There's so much that came out of it, you know. I remember at some point I was working with my publishers to make up the discussion questions for the book club guide. And we were like writing a question about like, what do the fireflies symbolize? And that's the question that I get all of the time for random people, even people who haven't read the book. They'll see the title, What the Fireflies Knew. And the first thing they'll say is, what did the fireflies know? And I'm like, well, I don't know. It's kind of rhetorical. But, you know, usually when people ask me that question, I flip it back on them and it works out really well. You know, someone's asking me, well, what did the fireflies know? And I'm like, well, what did it mean to you when you read it? what did you think fireflies meant? And then they'll give an answer, and then I'll say, yeah, that's the right answer, because I think it means a lot of things. And some of them were intentional and a lot of them were not intentional. But when I hear them, I'm like, yep, it means that. It meant that too. So
yeah, what you said.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I didn't call you Dr. Kai, but you are Dr. Kai Harris. Let me.
I am. My students call me, most of my students call me Dr. Kai instead of Dr. Harris. I give them the choice, and most of them like to call me Dr. Kai. So that's my name.
Thank you so much for your time. And if you could just hold on for me for just a second, I'm going to make an announcement about the next book, which once again, like you and I know, this wasn't necessarily timed for a specific date. It just so happened to come during this month when the book does touch on some things of mental health and mental health awareness month. And my next guest is also, we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to let you grab some water, pet the puppy, whatever the case may be. Thank you so much for your time. But just hold on for me.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
I'll say proper good night. So thank you. Thank you. So yes, everyone, that was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed reading the book, and I definitely suggest that you grab a copy of it, and it's available on audio as well, so you can listen to the story and just really think about it. Think about yourself as a young girl, things that you learn, family relationships, just all these different topics that the book touches on. But along the lines of continuing in the vein of mental health awareness. Now, just to let you know, next Monday will not be in this space because, of course, it's a holiday and many people will be traveling or doing other things, so will not be here then. But on Wednesday, 2 days from today, we will have another conversation about mental health. And that book is, by the time you read this, The Space Between Chesley's Smile and Mental Illness. This is Chesley, Chris, and April Simpkins. If you don't know who they are, Chesley is a young lady who died by suicide a couple years ago. She was a beauty queen, a lawyer. She was doing all these wonderful things in the world, but yet she still was dealing with mental illness. So we will be talking with her mother, who helped to finish writing this book, which Chesley started, prior to her passing. So if you can join us on Wednesday night, same time, or at least be available to catch the replay, I definitely suggest that you do, because it's important that we have these conversations surrounding our mental health. So thank you again for joining us for this wonderful conversation. I do look forward to seeing you again. And in the meantime, in between time, have a good night. And we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Take good care. Bye-bye.